Greetings, friends. Pull up a chair, pour yourself a drink, and settle in. I've got a story for you, one I never thought I'd find myself telling. I'm Grace, and this is about a time when my quiet little world started unraveling in ways I couldn't have seen coming. If you're new here, stick around. Maybe give this tale a nod of approval if it strikes a chord. It's the kind of thing that keeps me spinning these yarns, and I'm glad you're along for the ride. I grew up in a sleepy town, the kind where folks wave from porches and the air smells like fresh-cut grass. Back then, I dreamed of a simple life. Nothing grand, just a home filled with love and laughter. That dream took shape when I met Lucas, my college sweetheart. We got married in a little chapel, the sun spilling through stained glass as we promised each other forever. We didn't have much, no fancy car, no big savings, but what we had felt like gold, each other. At least that's what I told myself. Looking back, I wonder how I missed the cracks forming right under my feet. A few years ago, Lucas and I found a place to start fresh. A rental cottage in a quiet suburb, the kind of spot that feels like it's waiting for memories. It had a white picket fence, a porch with a creaky swing, and a backyard bursting with wildflowers that danced in the breeze. The day we moved in, I could hardly stop smiling. Boxes stacked high, Lucas teasing me about my terrible packing skills. It was ours, or at least it felt that way. That's when I met Henry, our landlord. He showed up that first week, toolbox in hand, to fix a loose step on the porch. He was in his early 60s, I'd guess, tall, with a weathered face that carried a lifetime of lines and a smile that seemed to light up the gray in his hair. "Everything okay with the place?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow as he hammered the step back into place. His voice had a gravelly warmth, like he'd spent years telling stories by a fire. I nodded, thanking him, and he lingered a bit, chatting about how the neighborhood used to be all farmland, how the oaks lining the street were saplings when he was a kid. I didn't think much of it then, just a friendly older guy doing his job. Lucas and I were too busy settling in, laughing as we hung mismatched curtains and argued over where the couch should go. The cottage wasn't perfect. Drafty windows, a faucet that dripped, but it had a charm that wrapped around us like a worn quilt. For the first time in a while, I felt like we were building something real. Henry seemed like part of that picture at first, just a kind face checking in. He'd wave from his truck when he drove by, or stop to ask if the furnace was holding up. I'd smile back, grateful for the attention to detail. It was all so ordinary, so easy to brush off. But now, when I replay those early days in my mind, I see the hints I didn't catch. The way his eyes lingered a second too long. The way his questions started feeling less about the house and more about me. Back then, I was too caught up in my dreams of a cozy life with Lucas to notice the shadow creeping in. I had no idea how that shadow would grow, or how it'd test everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the quiet little world I'd built. The cottage was still new to us, its quirks settling into our routine, creaky floors, the way the wind whistled through the oaks at night. But Lucas's job had other plans. His hours stretched longer, then came the weekend trips, leaving me alone with the hum of the fridge and the flicker of porch lights. I didn't mind at first. Solitude can be a friend if you let it. That's when Henry started showing up more. It began innocently enough. One morning he knocked, saying the furnace needed a look before winter hit. I let him in, watching him tinker while he asked about the place. Any leaks? Any drafts? I shrugged, said it was fine, and he nodded, his smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. A few days later, he was back, no reason given, just leaning on the porch rail, talking about the old diner that used to sit down the road. "Folks don't build things to last anymore," he said, his voice steady, like he was testing the air between us. I agreed, keeping it light, but I started noticing how he'd pause, watching me a beat longer than felt right. I told myself it was nothing. He was the landlord, checking in was his job. But the visits piled up, each one chipping at that easy excuse. One afternoon, I was out back, knees in the dirt, pruning the roses that spilled over the fence. The sun hung low, painting the yard gold, when I heard the gate creak. Henry stood there, hands in his pockets, that same warm smile spreading across his face. "Just passing by," he said, stepping closer. "Those flowers look mighty fine under your care." I brushed the dirt off my hands, laughing it off. They're stubborn, like me. Keep growing no matter what. He chuckled, settling against the fence as we talked. The weather came up. Hot for spring, wasn't it? Then the roses, how they reminded him of his mother's garden. I nodded along, clipping thorns, feeling the sweat bead on my neck. His voice softened as he shifted gears. "Are you happy here, Grace?" he asked, like he'd been holding the question all day. I froze, shears in hand, the words catching me off guard. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "It's home." But his eyes stayed on me, steady, searching, like he saw something I wasn't saying. Lucas had been gone more than he was around lately. The house felt bigger without him, too quiet, too still. I'd never admit it out loud, but there were nights I'd sit on the swing, staring at the stars, wondering why the silence felt heavier than it should. I didn't tell Henry that. Instead, I turned back to the roses, snipping a dead bloom. He didn't let it drop. "Folks forget how much it means to have someone who listens," he said, low and deliberate, like he was laying out a line for me to cross. I glanced up, meeting his gaze, warm, but with an edge I couldn't name. "Guess so," I mumbled, brushing it off with a nod. He lingered a while longer, the sun sinking behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. We talked about nothing, birds, the neighbor's dog, until he tipped his head and said, "Well, I'll let you get back to it." I watched him go, the gate clicking shut, his truck rumbling down the street. I stood there, shears dangling in my hand, a knot twisting in my gut. It wasn't anything he'd said, not really, just the way he'd looked at me, like he knew more about my loneliness than I did. Lucas would be home soon, I told myself, shaking it off. But as I turned back to the roses, the air felt different, thicker, like something had shifted, and I wasn't sure I could shift it back. Lucas was gone again, off on some business trip that stretched longer than he'd promised. The cottage felt hollow without him. Just me, a glass of red wine, and an old paperback I'd picked up from the thrift store down the road. The swing creaked outside, swaying in the evening breeze, and I was halfway through a chapter when the doorbell cut through the quiet. I set the book down, brow furrowing. It was late for visitors. I padded to the door, wineglass still in hand, and there was Henry standing under the porch light, his smile as warm as ever. "Was in the neighborhood," he said, hands tucked into his jacket. "Thought I'd see if everything's holding up." I hesitated, then stepped back, letting him in. "All good here," I said, offering a polite smile. His visits weren't new anymore, but something about the night, the stillness maybe, made this one feel different. He crossed into the living room, glancing at the wine, the book, the way the lamp cast soft shadows on the walls. "You've got a way of making a place feel alive," he said, settling onto the couch. I laughed, a little too quick, and took a sip to steady myself. "It's just a few candles and some clutter," I replied, hovering near the armchair. He waved a hand, dismissing my modesty. "It's more than that, Grace. You've got a touch." His eyes lingered on me, not the room, and I felt the air shift, thicker, heavier, like a storm brewing miles off. I sat down across from him, keeping the coffee table between us, and we fell into small talk. How the oak out front was dropping too many leaves, how the faucet still dripped sometimes. But then he moved, scooting closer to the edge of the couch, his knee brushing the table's edge. My grip tightened on the glass. "It's rare to meet someone who really sees you," he said, voice dropping low, like he was sharing a secret. "Someone who gets it. Life, I mean." I chuckled, uneasy, trying to dodge the weight of his words. "Guess I'm just good at nodding along," I said, taking another sip. He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, just a fraction, and rested his hand on the arm of the couch, close enough that I could feel the space between us shrinking. My heart kicked up, a frantic little rhythm I couldn't quiet. It wasn't anything he'd done, not really. Just the way his fingers rested there, steady, like he was claiming something. "Didn't mean to spook you, Grace," he said softly, catching the way I tensed. "You're just special. That's all." The word hung there, warm but sharp, slicing through the haze of the wine. I pulled my knees up, curling into myself, the glass of flimsy shield in my hand. "Thanks," I mumbled, barely meeting his eyes. "That's kind of you." He watched me, his gaze soft but piercing, like he could see the cracks I was hiding. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the clock ticking on the mantel, the wind rattling the windows. Then he stood, smoothing his jacket. "Suppose I should let you get back to your night," he said, that smile flickering back, though it didn't reach his eyes. I nodded, throat dry, and walked him to the door. "Take care, Henry," I managed, watching him step into the dark. The latch clicked shut, and I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. I sank back onto the couch, staring at the spot where he'd sat, the wine trembling in my glass. My mind raced. Should I tell Lucas? What would he think? That I'd flirted? Invited this somehow? Shame burned hot in my chest. But beneath it, something else stirred. Confusion, maybe fear. Henry hadn't crossed a line, not one I could name, but the way he'd looked at me lingered, heavy as the night pressing in around the cottage. Henry didn't stop coming. If anything, his visits grew bolder, like he'd tasted the edge of something and couldn't pull back. A jar of honey from a local farm one day, a quick check on the gutters the next, always with that smile, that gaze that stuck to me like damp heat. I kept it light, dodging his hints with a laugh or a shrug, but the unease clawed deeper each time. I'd catch myself watching the road, half expecting his truck to roll up and hating how it made my pulse jump. It was a Tuesday evening, quiet and still, when it all came to a head. I stood in the kitchen, the air thick with garlic and the sizzle of chicken in the pan. Cooking used to steady me, chopping, stirring, the rhythm of it. But tonight my hands felt unsteady, my mind drifting to dark corners. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, and I froze, knife hovering over a carrot. Through the window, I saw him. Henry, standing there, hands in his pockets, that familiar warmth lighting his face. My stomach twisted, but I wiped my hands on a towel, took a breath, and opened the door. "Good evening, Grace," he said, voice bright as he stepped inside. "Smells like heaven in here." I forced a smile, stirring the pot as he lingered near the counter. "Just dinner," I said, keeping my eyes on the chicken. "Nothing special." He chuckled, leaning against the fridge. "You always say that, but you've got a gift, making simple things shine." His words hung there, heavier than they should have been, and I waved them off, turning down the heat. "Anything you need, Henry?" I asked, hoping he'd take the hint. He paused, then said, "Thought we could talk. Been a while since we really sat down." I blinked, surprised. He'd never pushed for more than a quick chat. My chest tightened, but I nodded, leading him to the living room. I gestured to the couch, taking the armchair across from him, the space between us a lifeline I clung to. He started slow, hands clasped, voice steady. "Been thinking lately? Life's funny, isn't it? How it slips by and you don't notice what matters till it's staring you in the face." I nodded, cautious. "Sure, it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day." His eyes locked on mine, sharp and deep. "Exactly. But sometimes you meet someone and it wakes you up, makes you feel alive again." My throat went dry. He leaned forward, just enough to close the gap in the air. "Grace, I felt it since we met. Something between us. You're different. Special. In a way I can't shake." The words hit like a jolt, soft but electric, and I gripped the arms of the chair. "Henry, I started, voice shaky. "I'm married. I love Lucas, you know that." He didn't flinch, just watched me, steady as stone. "I don't want to mess anything up with him," he said, low and firm. "But I can't pretend I don't feel this. Had to tell you." My heart slammed against my ribs, fear and confusion tangling tight. This wasn't a friendly check-in anymore. It was raw, real, and I didn't know how to hold it. I stood needing distance and forced the words out. "I appreciate you being honest, Henry, but I'm clear. I'm with Lucas. This stays professional, nothing more." A silence stretched, heavy and thick, and I saw a flicker of disappointment cross his face. He nodded, slow, deliberate. "I get it," he murmured. "I'm sorry if I made you uneasy. Wasn't my aim." I exhaled, relief washing through me, though the air still buzzed with something unresolved. He rose, offering a quiet, "Thanks for hearing me out," and headed for the door. I followed, watching him step into the dusk, his shadow fading down the path. The latch clicked, and I leaned against the wall, the weight of it all pressing down. Relief, yes, but a nagging sense that nothing would feel simple again. The days after Henry's confession dragged slow and heavy, like the air before a storm breaks. I tried to shove it all down, his words, that look in his eyes, determined to keep my life with Lucas steady. But the weight clung to me, a quiet ache I couldn't shake. I'd catch myself staring out the kitchen window, half expecting his truck to roll up, and when it didn't, I wasn't sure if I felt relieved or hollow. A few days later, the doorbell rang again. My heart lurched, but I squared my shoulders and opened it. Henry stood there, hands in his pockets, his smile softer, almost sheepish. "Hey, Grace," he said, voice low. "Just wanted to check in. Make sure the place is holding up." I nodded, stepping aside, but kept my guard up. "It's fine, Henry. Thanks for asking." He lingered in the doorway, then took a breath. "I've been thinking about what I said. I didn't mean to put you in a spot. I respect where you stand. I just had to get it off my chest." I studied him, the lines on his face deeper in the afternoon light, and felt a pang of something. Pity, maybe, or just the strain of it all. "I appreciate that," I said, firm but not cold. "But I need to be clear. My heart's with Lucas. This can't be more than it is. You're my landlord, and I value that, but that's where it stops." His eyes softened, a trace of sadness flickering there, but he nodded. "I hear you," he murmured. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line. Won't happen again." He tipped his head, a small, respectful gesture, and turned to go. I stayed in the doorway, watching his truck rumble off, the dust kicking up in the late sun. A strange mix churned inside me. Relief, yes, but a twinge of sorrow, too. I'd needed to draw that line, but it didn't erase the mess of feelings he'd stirred up. I shut the door, leaning against it, letting the quiet settle over me like a blanket. The cottage felt mine again, but different, like a page had turned, and I couldn't unread it. That night, Lucas came home. The table was set with candles. The chicken I'd cooked days before reheated with a little extra spice. He dropped his bag by the door, grinning as he pulled me into a hug. "Missed this," he said, his breath warm against my hair. We sat down, the flicker of light dancing on the walls, and for the first time in weeks, I felt anchored. He reached for my hand, squeezing it. "You okay? You're quieter than usual." I smiled, brushing off the shadows still lingering in my mind. "Just thinking too much. Glad you're back." He grinned, digging into the food. "Nothing beats coming home to this, to you." His words sank in, simple and solid, and I held on to them like a lifeline. We talked about his trip, the little things, the way the porch swing creaked when we sat on it later, the stars peeking through the oaks. The chaos Henry had kicked up still echoed, faint but there, and I knew I'd carry it for a while. But sitting there with Lucas, his hand brushing mine, I saw what mattered most. Our life, our love, the promises we'd built. I'd dodged something with Henry, said it right, but it left me sharper, more awake. I wouldn't let anything, anyone, pull me from this. Lucas was my rock, my home, and I'd fight to keep it that way. As the night stretched on, the cottage glowing soft around us, I made a quiet vow to hold tight to what we had, to face whatever came next together. The whispers of doubt faded, drowned out by the steady beat of his laugh, and I knew, deep down, we'd weather anything side by side.